So you want to hear a joke?
Give me a joke.
It's a startup joke. So two startup founders are in a bar and one of them takes a big stiff drink. And so the other one says, "Hey, how was your week?" And the guy says, "Oh, it was amazing. We had this great meeting with a Fortune 500 company about a possibility of a successful partnership. It amount to a million in ARR, and they'd be willing to pay up front. And it's a great meeting." And the other founder puts his arm around him and pats his back and says, "It's all right. We didn't make any sales either."
It's a good one. A good one.
And with that, welcome to Zero to Traction, a podcast about how first-time founders create companies at scale. I'm one of your regular co-hosts, JDM, aka Josh David Miller, and I'm here with my other regular co-host, Cameron Law. Cameron, how are you on this almost New Year? We're recording right before the New Year, but I think probably by the time people are listening to this, it will be the New Year.
Yeah, I'm doing well. It's good to be in the studio with you, my friend. And yeah, it's crazy how fast 2024 came and went, and off to 2025 with some new opportunities to work with founders, and been fun leading into this year with some of these new opportunities. So I'm looking forward to deep diving into, one, through Zero to Traction, how we can continue to support founders and getting the information they need, and also some of the other opportunities.
Yeah, I'm pretty excited for 2025 for Zero to Traction. Hopefully, we'll have on more guests to offset us a little bit, get us the supervision we need to produce a quality podcast. Got lots of friends, of course, that are interested in coming on the show or back on the show. So stay tuned. I think 2025 is going to be a fun year for Zero to Traction. But it's like, so speaking of New Year's, like, I think it's almost cliche at this point, to say like, "Oh, we've got this, we're in the new year, and let's talk about resetting and goals and all that stuff." There's nothing wrong with that, right? It's an important part of human psychology to give us that reset. But with full acknowledgement of the irony here, we've got something new that we thought would be fun to talk about. A new program that some of you, if you've spent any time with us, you've probably heard us talk about this. We've been working on this for a little bit of while. It's called the Traction Lab Venture Accelerator, and we're going to talk a little bit about the history about what this new program is. That is actually not really an accelerator. So we'll just save the reveal on that later. But then we're going to peel back the curtain a little bit and talk about how we do what we do with startups. So how we help startups get to their next fundraising round and what that looks like. So we're going to peel back the curtain. We're going to have a nice reveal here. But for now, we'll kick this off with an episode that we are calling the "I promise this isn't a sales pitch" edition of Zero to Traction. So Cameron, I've heard you tell the story great a few times. So like, rewind us back to how did this all get started? Why are we creating a new thing?
Well, awesome. Well, it seems like, every year we do create something new. No, I'm just messing around, from Zero to Traction to this. But, you and I got together, I think it was early summertime, maybe late spring, and really, looked at kind of the ecosystem and the support that was out there to support founders. And not that we were necessarily looking at starting anything new, but it was kind of a scan of the landscape to see, how can we better serve founders, and then who did we really want to pour more energy into. And we identified really what we're calling seed stage founders. There's kind of I know you'll kind of dive in a little bit deeper on kind of how we've clearly defined that, but we started looking at these seed stage founders that were really looking to raise their next price round. So some maybe haven't taken money, and some already have. And we saw that there was a gap in support for these types of founders where they'd really gone through a number of the curriculum-based programs. So our, kind of traditional accelerator, 10-week deep dive into some of the, support that they need to get from, A to B in relation to curriculum and content. But oftentimes weren't getting the personalized support they needed to ultimately get to that next milestone that will really set them up for success in raising that next round. And, one of the things that we saw from that was when it was really based in this curriculum, and that there's always a great time to support earlier stage founders with some of that content so they can, set themselves up for success as a business operator, but it didn't really help those in kind of making the progress that they needed. Particularly, it wasn't around just polishing a deck for polishing a deck's sake, but it was really, what's the evidence and foundations that need to go into this to become a more interesting investment opportunity to investors in our region and beyond. And so we came up with the Traction Lab, which really flipped that model and said, let's take a partnership approach to help you identify and map out the milestones you need in order to get to your next priced round, and also help you identify those foundations that you need in order to just be investment readiness. So basically that checklist support that you ultimately need to, actually take in the capital as a company. And so that's kind of the impetus of it, was really looking at how we can identify this gap that we saw, and kind of building a support structure, and that it wasn't this program to like push you through it, but really work hand in hand with you to get to the point that you need. And recognizing that, for some founders that might take 6 months, for some it might take 18, and that ultimately we want to support those that are hitting those milestones along the process. And I know you'll dive in a little bit deeper to, how we set up some of these kind of traction boxes as we, might but unlocking more and more support for those that are making those steps forward in the process. So that was kind of the high level framework of how we came together and wanted to do something differently. But I'll turn it back to you, JDM, to dive into some of the magic behind it.
Yeah, I think one of something that you hit on is like every time you talk about it, it really lands with me. This idea of this like gap, like there's a seed stage gap, in any ecosystem. And I've worked in a lot of different startup ecosystems, and I see this, most ecosystems that I go to, is that you get all these founders, and they're trying to accelerate their business. They're trying to find more traction. They're trying to get to that next step, and so they're just bouncing from program to program to program, trying to participate and level up. But all of those programs basically fall into two categories, right? They either like say, let's take whatever you are and turn it into the best possible pitch. And that often is working on the deck and, polishing and stuff relating to that. And then you have a demo day and you do the whole thing, right? And then on the other side, it's like, okay, well, let's teach founders stuff, and we'll put them through, like you called it, the curriculum, right? And, we'll learn about the business model canvas, then we'll, learn about the value prop canvas, and we'll, learn about sales, right? And just go through these like checkbox stuff, to do it. And those are the only two things, but none of those things are what the founder's looking for, which is, how do I find the traction that I need in this particular company? I'm not interested in just creating a business model canvas. I want to figure out how to find that traction. It's like, it always resonates. It always lands with me, like this idea of this gap. And so we're like, okay, so who are the people who like really sit, in that gap, right? So for us, there's these first time founders of highly scalable tech enabled startups where there's really strong founder market fit. So they're in a space that they're really passionate about, and they found a problem that's real. And that problem is in a large and a growing market, right? So there's a lot of upside, a lot of opportunity, a lot of long-term potential here. The founders themselves are really adaptive. They focus on doing over learning, and they're really flexible. Or I think the lame word that people use is coachable. But I don't like that, because then it implies a right and a wrong answer, which I don't like. Like, let me tell you, the founder, what's right and wrong, as opposed to being more adaptive, which is, like the ability to take in a lot of diverse perspectives and make sense of that, by setting the ego aside and figuring out what's right. It's ultimately at the end of the day, the founder. And they also, like, just from a tactical perspective, like they have real traction in the market, but they don't have product market fit yet. So they haven't figured out what the engine is, right? So like at that stage, there's just not a lot that helps them out. And so that's where this idea of the venture lab, comes into play. That's like, how can we bring these companies into our portfolio to help them draw a line between where they are now and that next fundraising round, which could be a pre-seed or a seed, or even a Series A round. But like it's pre-product market fit, formal raise, in some time in the like 6 to 18 month time frame. And so we draw a line between those two things, and we say, okay, how do we get from here to there, in a way that is also flexible and adaptable, because you can't predict out 6 months, let alone 18 months in the life of a startup. And so just I want to like say one or two things about the program, let you add a few things about that, and then we can talk about secret sauce. But from a program perspective, we have these boxes that you mentioned, right? Where we have this box 0, which we bring companies in, we say, all right, like, let's figure out what the next step is for you. Let's draw that roadmap, that adaptive roadmap. Let's make sure that you have that basic investment readiness deal room stuff checked in. You have the right corporate structure, the right registrations. You have the proper protections. There's a whole set of diligence stuff and just to make sure you're even able to accept the check. Should you be fortunate enough to get the check. And then third, to make sure that you're a good fit for the program, because we're spending some time together. So like we figure that out, we do that over the course of a number of weeks, not months, but over a number of weeks to kind of get through all that stuff. And then once we have that, we move into what amounts to something like 3 boxes. We use 3 boxes because it's easy to talk about here. But reality is a bit more flexible. And that roadmap is tied to those 3 boxes. And in those 3 boxes, we give an increasing amount of resources based on hitting certain milestones. So, operational support, from HR, legal, finance, whatever, some co-working or office space is part of that. Tons of mentorship as is needed, subject matter expertise that goes into that, maybe some sales support, some non-dilutive capital that kind of goes to help run some experiments, but all the stuff that you need to like unlock that whatever that milestone is, to conduct the activities that get you to the milestone that gets you out of that box and into the next one. And we do all of that in exchange for a small equity grant back to the accelerator, so that we can ensure that our motives are aligned with yours, that we're after the success of your company. We're not after some vanity metrics ourselves. We're not going to let you have vanity metrics, so you can't let us have vanity metrics either. Yeah, so that's kind of like the venture lab as it exists. You can kind of add on to that, Cameron.
Yeah, I think I wanted to recognizing where, one, obviously want to demonstrate what the Traction Lab is, but I think just in the context of the podcast here for founders that are at a stage where you've done a number of programs and are seeking more resources, I think partly what we're identifying and sharing is sometimes the curriculum's not going to be all that much different from program to program. And so as you think about like your continual progress to build that engine for growth, is like seeking more of that hands-on doing in relation to those programs. So whether it's the Traction Lab or seeking another type of resource, is one that's really going to be forcing you to do some of the work, and less of it being like do homework for like putting your deck together, but more so of like building the foundations of that engine. So putting pieces together to say, here's why I'm a better investment opportunity, and peeling back the onion of what investors are saying in relation to what you're pitching to them, right? So if you're, hey, I don't understand your go-to-market slide, right? The difference would be, instead of it being, let's change something on the slide, was like, well, what are they actually asking? Is it not clear who your early adopter is and how you're getting in front of them? And how might we then, through a program like, or a resource like the Traction Lab, actually help you run a test to see if that's a clear and effective go-to-market strategy and plan going forward. And so it's taking that mindset of like learning for, gathering information of like, so I have better language around the startup process to actually let me go learn about the ins and outs of my actual startup, and how I can then gain the evidence to prove that to investors that our model is a great investment opportunity that would scale. And so just as a global learning, I think seeking those additional resources as you've done some of those foundational programs, right? Like, and that's one of the things, Josh and I have, we've been a part of all of these programs. So we're not saying that those programs shouldn't exist, but there's at a point in the time in your journey as a founder that there's kind of this click forward you need to take. And oftentimes there's been a gap in that resource. And so seeking those additional resources will support you in one that kind of applies more of the thumb in the back to do the work that matters. So that would be just the additional context that I would tie there. And I think, just one of the key components is this milestone setting. And I think that's, a portion is certainly, the framework we've looked at, it was like, through kind of our early stage 0 box or whatever we wanted to call it, was, doing a point in time of like, where are you? What's the feedback you're getting? What do you think you need to raise in order to get to wherever you're trying to go? And I think a portion of that oftentimes is, well, I want to raise X number around just because I think I need that amount of capital, but it all should be tying to a milestone that you're ultimately trying to achieve. right? And so working with the Traction Lab, our goal is to help you set that milestone map and identify the gaps in evidence to get there. And so maybe I'll turn it back to you, JDM, and kind of looking at like, what does it look like to build this roadmap? I know we won't know the third key milestone way out there, but like, how might that stacking for founders look like? And even, if you're not building with the Traction Lab, like how could someone build this process in their own culture and startup process as they go forward?
Yeah, that's I think that's the great segue into how does this apply outside of TLVA, outside the Traction Lab Venture Accelerator. So as the title said, not a sales pitch. If you are interested in like learning more about the program and how we do it, you might want to become involved either as one of our portfolio companies or as a mentor, or have some other involvement in that. Link in the show notes. You can go to rightbox.co. There's a link there, and you can take a look at it. But aside from that, like, let's set aside this new endeavor and talk about the mechanics behind it works. And I agree, Cam, like the big thing is the milestone-based progression, right? And so this is the idea that if you say, okay, where I'm going to go as a startup is I want to raise this next round. And let's just use that as like our benchmark here, but it could be anything, right? It could be whatever it is like if you're bootstrapping, for example, that milestone, that far off milestone is probably not a fundraising round because you're bootstrapping, but it's going to be something that says it's time to double down, right? It's time that like, this is where, we're going to have sufficient evidence and confidence to really, go at this twice as hard as we're going at it now, or put more resources at it than we're going at it now, or this is what's going to unlock the next phase of whatever, right? Like however you're drawing that, but we'll use because it's easy to talk about and a little bit more generic across startups. We'll talk about the fundraising round. So like, let's say, all right, we want to raise, sometime in the next, year-ish, right? We want to raise, a series seed, and we'll just have some easy math. Say we're looking for $1 million, for this series seed. That's what we're trying to do. So if that's the far off milestone, then what we can do is say, all right, so that's the far off milestone. That's milestone Z. In order to hit milestone Z, you have to hit milestone Y. And in order to hit milestone Y, you have to hit milestone X, right? In order to hit X, you have to hit W. And so what we do is draw back from Z, that far off milestone, back to wherever you are right now, right? So you're not at zero, or if you are, that's great too, right? They try all the way back to A, and that's fine. But this is what's called innovation accounting. You can kind of Google that. We've talked about it on the show before. I'll put a link to the last episode where we talked about some of this goal setting and milestone setting and some of the definitional work around there we talked about before, so we'll just link to that. And I think maybe was it a year ago or so, Cameron, you had somebody, was it Sharon Tall who spoke?
We had Sharon Tall, Dan Toma, who wrote Innovation Accounting, one of the books.
Thank you. Yes, Dan Tomo. Okay, so we'll put the link to a talk by Dan Tomo, and you can check that out too. Anyway, so like that's innovation accounting. The idea is like you find this chain of leading indicators of success that leads you to it. So you're not like, let me track my progress like on a scale of 0 to 10, on my way to Z. Like it's just too much. There's too much there. It's like saying like, am I closer to the mountain? I don't know. I see it though. There's the North Star. But instead saying like, all right, so if I'm standing on this high hill, I see the mountain off in the distance. I see that there's a river, right? So then this river is a third of the way between me and the mountain. And so as you progress, you should hit a river. And if you don't hit the river, you're not heading toward the mountain, right? And so like even as you go down like deep under the jungle canopy, you still have something that tells you that you're on the right track toward the mountain, even though it's not hitting the mountain yet, right? So you have to set that back. And each of those milestones are not just general indicators. They're a series of 3 different things that go into it. So one is the goal, the milestone. That's a metric that's measurable. It's you either hit it or you don't, right? Like, hey, there's the river. And then in addition to that, you have some activities that you have to perform in order to hit that milestone. And so those activities are anything related to your startup. They could be sales, they could be networking, and they could be some fundraising related activities. It could be some investor readiness things, that basic traction stuff. They could be some technology development. There's a million things that it could be, but like there's all these activities that you have to perform in order to do that. And my little analogy here of my jungle cruise, it's there's some of these activities are like we have to walk toward the jungle. We're gonna hack away at the foliage in there to try to clear a path. Um, and so like that's what we have to do in order to get there. The third thing is in order to conduct those activities to get to that milestone, you have to put certain resources at it. And so like that's where you have to decide like what this is where we talk about a lot, proportion your effort to the evidence is like, what is based on what you know right now, like what is it worth, right, to try to hit this next milestone. So you're not saying like if that mountain is amazing and so like I'm willing to bet a ton of gold that I can hit that mountain, right? It's like that's not really what we're talking about here. Like what does it make sense for the river? Like I'm gonna hit the river in right in this time period. And so there's your effort, there's time. Time is the one resource you can never get back. There's people and human capital that go after. There's all these resources that you have access to or that you can get access to in order to do that, right? So you have these resources to help you conduct these activities, and those activities are getting you to a milestone. And if you draw that chain back again from like Z to Y to X to W and so on, wherever your current status is, you get this milestone-based progression that you can use to really intelligently keep yourself focused and accountable. And just to foreshadow before I kick it over back to you, Cam, is like there's two other pieces that kind of go along parallel with this that we'll get to in a second. One of them is like this idea of iterative validation. So feel free to segue into that if it feels right. But and the last one is investor readiness and how we don't mean your pitch deck. So because all these things are really tightly related, but that's sort of how I think about milestone-based progression.
Yeah. Well, I love the new analogy, and we'll have to continue to build on that because like what comes to mind initially for me is like part of the fundraising process is an investor might not know the exact journey across the forest to the mountaintop, but they've seen enough of these adventurers to know what they need to get to certain points along that particular journey. And so recognizing that if you're demonstrating that this journey is going to get there more quickly than the other explorers, right? Like they're gonna question your understanding of what it actually takes to get there, and then also what resources are needed to get from point to point. And so recognizing that, what we often say is like they've seen the pattern, right? They also know to a degree what this process to get from milestone to milestone is. And, kind of my segue, I'll let you take the iterative, assumption testing. The one that comes to mind for me on the investment readiness checklist, which is a core component of, I think, any obviously fundraising process, like it's just, you have to be able to do that, is kind of if we're building on the analogy of, trying to get to the mountain top across these different, not fountains, forests and rivers, is, what, do you have your backpack, which you ultimately has all of your resources in it, right? Do you have, while you're on this mission, who's on your team, and the agreements that you have along the particular pathway to get there. And that's like your permit to even get into the, the hike to the mountaintop is kind of how I would look at that. And so, it's the only way that you can ultimately take on those resources as you go through that particular process. So as you get to the river, here's my tickets to cross the bridge because I've done my diligence in bringing it with me. And it's not going to delay me having got to the milestone to be able to then ultimately cross. So you might be doing excellent work as founder, you're getting traction, but you haven't done some of those foundational elements that ultimately will allow you to bring on the capital. And those can take time, right? If you haven't properly incorporated, that's going to delay your ability to bring on the capital that you need to accelerate into that next milestone. And as a investor, they might really question, like, why haven't you done some of these things? You've done great work in getting the traction, but some of these other things that aren't buttoned up, can also lead to additional questions. The last thing, just that the analogy kind of sparked for me was, as we think about investors, someone might be better in helping you navigate the forest than they would navigating the river as well as climbing the mountain. And so what we often hear is your like smart capital or leveraging your ties to help you achieve certain milestones. And so recognizing who you bring onto your cap table outside of the financial resources that might help you push through these different elements of the startup journey. Some might have more experience in navigating a certain type of industry, right? And so maybe your investor has better clarity in navigating the Amazon rainforest versus the Tahoe National Forest, right? And so understanding that the resources and process would be different, and so it's not just having the proper resources, but also the guidance along that particular process to get to where you want most efficiently and effectively, right? And so maybe you have additional resources when you get to that next milestone that you then can double down as you go forward. So I know we really leaned in heavy to the analogy, but I think it's a really interesting one, and there's a lot to be built on that. So thanks for bringing it. But I'll turn it back to you on
it
kind
just
of
kind
the
of came to
further.
me in the
Yeah.
in the moment, but I've used a similar analogy in kind of a sort of related context. And as you were talking, I started thinking about all the ways that actually still makes a lot of sense. Like if you think about these old expeditions back in earthbound explorer days as opposed to extraterrestrial explorer days, when you used to have to get your venture funded, right? Like you have boats and you have supplies and you have people that you have to convince to go along with you, and all of that stuff is kind of the same. And I kept thinking of the Lost City of Zed. I don't know if you ever read the book or saw the
Yeah.
movie, but it was kind of a biopic about Percy Fawcett, who went into the Amazon jungle, and he was originally doing some cartography work. But eventually he became convinced that there was this lost civilization that he called Zed or Z in American parlance, but like the lost city of Zed. And they were all British, so it's like Zed there. That's why I'm pronouncing it that way. But like the
Well,
anyway, so he became convinced of this, of this lost civilization, and kept going back, and ultimately it took his life, in pursuit of this. So I'll try not to make the analogy go in that particular direction, but I think that there actually probably are some interesting startup lessons in that. But anyway, if we think about like this idea of, okay, we have this destination that we're going for, that we're trying to hit, and you've done all of the investor readiness to get people onto the same page as you, and to see the same vision that you do, and to invest in you, either with their time or their capital, or the human or financial and relational capital and all that stuff. Then you still have the work of going through the process of iterative validation. And iterative validation is the build, measure, learn loop. And I find that to be, just from a terminology perspective, a bit reductive, which is why I don't call it build, measure, learn very often, because build ends up being like just as much of a stretch metaphor as our Jungle Cruise example is a lot of times. But because it's not always like literally something that you're building, particularly in the earlier stages, like pre-product market fit, sometimes it involves building something, but just as often it doesn't. So the idea of iterative validation is to set up regular checkpoints to refine your strategy based on real feedback, and to ensure that you're finding the traction that you need to get to that investor readiness and to hit that next milestone. And so you have to very regularly be coming back to, what is the data telling us? And does that confirm or disconfirm our priors? And it's this Bayesian approach. And I'll try not to get like in deep into statistics here, but like the 30,000 foot view of like Bayesian statistics is the idea that everything is a prior probability, right? There's a chance of it being true. So this is where we would say that like your startup has a 1 in 100 chance of being successful. That's the prior probability going into this. And then as you get data back, right, you get some like, okay, well, how does that change the probability? And then we have a posterior probability. Now that we've got data in, that changes. No, this data was confirming. So now maybe it's a 5 in 100 chance of it succeeding, right? So now the prior probability going into the next experiment is 5 in 100. So now you run an experiment, get some data back, and you have another posterior probability, right? So you keep going through the cycle of getting either stronger or weaker, depending, right? Either confirming or disconfirming, but you're constantly getting that data back. In order to do that, you have to have very formal cycles. This is not wandering aimlessly in the jungle and hoping you one day hit the river. It's actually saying, this is what I think this looks like. And so this is where we've talked, I think, maybe a couple episodes ago, on test cards. On the idea of saying, all right, we're going to define an experiment. An experiment is testing an hypothesis. That hypothesis is precise and discrete and falsifiable. And once we have that hypothesis defined, we pick out the right experiment. That's just a tool off the shelf. We run that experiment, we get data back, and now that we have the data back, we analyze it and then figure out what it means. Then we synthesize it into our overall model, and then we begin again. That's build, measure, learn. And that implies and very much necessitates formality. This is not an informal process that we go through. This is, in fact, a very formal process. And some people are very good at doing that in their head and kind of keeping this like, I wonder if this will thing. I bet if I go, I'll close X number of deals, and like let's see if that happens, right? The vast majority of people are not. And so a lot of startups end up wandering aimlessly because they're just kind of seeing what happens. Like, I wonder, let me reach out to 10 people on LinkedIn and I'll see what happens. And like, oh, I got one person replied and it was a good conversation. So, and like, well, what does that mean? Right? What does it mean that 1 out of 10 did it? Right? Like, there's more work to be done. And again, that show that we mentioned before, we talked about milestone setting back in I think it was late November, early December, talks about that in greater detail. But it's that process of saying, this is what I think is going to happen. And if I'm right, then I will measure X, and you go out and measure it. And did you get it? And if you didn't, that's disconfirming. And then what does that mean? And if you did get it, great. What does that mean? And then what becomes the next thing to do? And we can talk about this a number of ways, but riskiest assumption or riskiest hypothesis is probably the easiest way. But that constantly going through the process of getting iterative validation as you conduct the activities getting you toward that milestone. So even in an individual milestone, if you're going from, W to X, in there, that W to X is still a 10-step process where you're just running these little experiments, trying to find positive stuff. And it's not something that you can shove into an arbitrary time window. Your experiment has a time, right? Each individual experiment has a defined time, but you can't say in a month we're going to X, because that implies things that you don't necessarily know in advance. And we do need to draw that time for planning purposes, but we know that the further away we are from today, the more unrealistic it is. Thus, Cam, your joke a bit ago about not knowing what's happening, in box 3, right, in the traction lab. But and that's because we can draw kind of a directionally accurate thing, but it's going to evolve over time as we get more, more data back in. So that's the idea of iterative validation.
Well, I also that it also made me think of the time it might take to get from, say, 0 to stage 3. If it is the 18 months, I mean, how much of the industry or things might shift, right? There's always changing elements, particularly if we're building and then, AI really took off the way that it has, right? And so now that kind of shifts the landscape. And, as I was thinking again of our analogy, like, maybe the season has changed, therefore you need different resources or you need a different strategy to get to where you're going. But, you're just using that as a way to again, still gain evidence, but demonstrate how you're going to navigate the new world that you're ultimately exploring. So I think that, continually having that mindset of like, okay, I know where I need to go next, but this is also in lieu of, once I hit this milestone, it's likely to get me to this next point. And you're telling that story, and they're investing in your ability to ultimately connect those dots along that journey. They know, yes, that future milestone might morph and change, but again, it's that methodology and thought process of how you're going to wander the unknowns from point to point.
Yeah. And I think this is something that, like, it feels a bit abstract while we're talking about it. And that's because it's exceptionally difficult and every startup is different, which is, part of, again, why we think that these curriculum-based programs or pitch modification programs are great at certain points in time in your journey, and are probably not a good use of time when you're not at those points in time in your journey. But I want to try to see if we can get a little bit more specific anyway. So, like, if we say, all right, when we talk about these milestones that you have to hit for the next fundraising round, right? I would say we're talking about like the 8 T's. That's usually what I go back to. And so 8 T's are these little, they're not check marks, right? They're scales, they're levers, right? That you pull, that you can score better or worse in. But these are roughly, them. There's the team. Of course, we know how, that's you and your co-founders and your investors, strategic partners, advisors, and the employees, the key employees you've been able to hire, all that stuff. Team. There's TAM, that's total addressable market. That's like you're in a large and growing market. Timing, like what's the timing in that market? Why now? Why not a year ago or a year from now? So it's team, TAM, timing. Traction, we've talked about, right? What evidence you have from customers. technology, like why, how is this thing defensible? That doesn't necessarily mean that you have proprietary, intellectual property that, you've patented and everything like that. But you have some secret sauce or unfair advantages, something that's going to prevent competition from just blowing you out of the water, soon. Then we have the terms. So this is your ability to define an offer to investors that makes sense, right? So there's a valuation that's reasonable. You're asking for a amount of money that's reasonable, both for that valuation, and for the current point in time and the evidence that you have, and the right vehicle for all of that. It's far less complicated than I'm making it sound at the moment, but you do need to define what that looks like, and it needs to be commensurate with your progress in the other 7 boxes, right? And the other seven T's. So it's team, timing, traction, terms, technology, and then theory is another one. So this is like, how are we going to get to the next, how are we going to get to that next milestone? And so this is a go-to-market strategy. This is business model. This is all the little details that kind of go into that. And then what am I missing? I'm missing one. Oh man.
It was
This is
17. It was 17.
there's only 7 T's. Obviously only 7 T's. Well, it doesn't matter. Anyway, I'll put a link. I have an article that I wrote about this recently, so I'll put a link in the show notes to that. But anyway, so like the point is, like, each one of these boxes are things that you can look at for how to make progress in that. And at any fundraising round or any milestone that you're going to hit, all of those are going to have certain ways. Some are going to need to be dialed up, some are going to need to be dialed down. And so when you're really early stages and you're, getting out for angel investment, stuff like that, you're going to need some traction, but less, right? But you're going to need to show that there's a market here. You're going to need to dial that all the way up. And then as you get further along, like, you need to be showing that that market is even larger and growing. And so that you can get out of the early adopters and cross the chasm into the early majority or something like that, right? So that even those, the goalposts within each of those change over time. They're not absolute scales. They're relative scales to where you are. Team, same thing. Like, why you is like it's the first question an angel investor is going to ask you, right? Like, why you, or at least they're going to be thinking it. And then as you hit Series A, it's like, well, have you been able to hire people? Like, do you have that the ability to attract and retain talent? Did you get that rock star CTO, or were you able to bring on a CFO of note, or really something like that? Do you have a lead investor that is a great, logo and name and reputation in this space that gives you some of that external validation and all this? So like, all those things change over time, but those are the things that you're using to define this is where we need to be. And then once you have that, then that just draws the work, right? Because you either have that or you don't. And if you don't, well, at that Z, let's draw backward, right?
Love it. And I don't have anything to add to that, my friend. I think that's
Well,
solid. As you think of milestone setting, those are the, ultimately, I think when you're thinking of that spectrum that you talked about versus just like a check mark, is it's the amount of evidence that you're gaining and de-risking that process from an outsider's perspective. And that's why we say an investor is investing in your business model, not your product. And that, like, ultimately across these 8 categories, right, was like, okay, my confidence is really high in this, my confidence is a little bit lower in these elements. And that's where you're going to see when they're asking questions in a pitch or a conversation. And we've had those conversations where, most of the time a pitch isn't what we set it out to be in kind of these demo day settings. But when they're pinpointing on something and asking questions, that's where they see the risk in your business, right? And so then in taking that feedback, it's not, how do I articulate this better? That could be, maybe you miss the mark in articulating it, but maybe it's a lack of clarity in the evidence that you've gained thus far. And so how could you be either more clear in demonstrating what the evidence is, or you need to go say, I need to gain more evidence that this is actually a true component, that then I have de-risked this more for the investor to get to that next fundraising round. So that's just kind of a way to be thinking about that spectrum, is alleviating that risk and getting to more, you won't have 100% certainty, but getting as close as you can.
Well, I think that is a great tour de force of all the things that we look at and kind of the high level methodology that we use to help startups hit their next milestone, fundraising round or otherwise. So I think looking at the clock here, that'll probably wrap it up. But of course, this would not, it would not be zero detraction if we did not have some frivolity, some frivolous thoughts to share with you. So I'll go ahead and go first because
You
yeah, I
you
figured you
you you
welcome.
warmed up and you already knew what you were gonna do. Fair enough.
I
Thank you.
did. Well, no, I thought of it. Or I thought of it later. So, okay. So I have a toddler. He's 1.5. And so everybody tells you that when hit like Christmas time, like you get to see the magic of the season through their eyes and everything. And I know my wife has been like just crazy excited for all that brings, she just loves Christmas. And so there's like, she did the elf on the shelf and just all the things. And, this, as he's 1.5 now, he's 6 months last Christmas, like he didn't know what was going on. Now he like understands the word presents and, he loved the lights and all the things. And so there's that what they say, about, you get to see the magic through their eyes. There's a little bit of truth to that, but that's not the frivolous thought I have. The frivolous thought I have is what they don't tell you. What they don't tell you is what happens when all that goes away. When all the magic just suddenly is gone and the kid wakes up one morning and doesn't understand why Christmas is over. Uh, so like we had I had my parents were in town from they live out of state. I had my parents in town and they didn't stay with us, but they were here every day, and they're always like super helpful. And like they were playing with Liam and like doing the whole thing, doing the grandparent thing, and loving the grandparent thing. My sister and her kids were who are all like school age kids. They were staying with us, and so he had cousins to see and play with. One that doted all over him, and an auntie that does that. The neighbors had like these like lit up reindeer in their front yard, with the Christmas lights with like the mesh reindeer and all that stuff. And so he'd look out the window multiple times a day and go, dear, dear, right, as he sees the lights out there. Well, since all of that went away over the weekend, every day now it's just him asking for all the things that I can't give anymore. Where's grandpa? Where's grandma? Where's auntie? Where are the cousins? Where are the deer? And so I get just and I have to like 30 times a day now. I'm like, sorry, I went home. We're done now. And they don't tell you that that's part of the magic of Christmas is when that magic suddenly evaporates and reality sets in. And here we are.
There's probably something in there about startup life as well as like be a entrepreneur, start up a business, raise money, and it's not all. I don't know. But that is I wouldn't have thought of that, but I definitely, well, seeing as I don't have a kid, my dog and cat don't say, where did the Christmas tree go and all of those things. But I love that. So thanks for sharing.
Yeah.
That made me think of some other frivolous thought, but I'll stick with the one that I was originally thinking coming in. It does tie back to one earlier. So the Kings have been struggling this year. We had high hopes for what this season held. And, one, we had picked up a new person, DeMar DeRozan, which we thought would be an added, person to the repertoire. We, signed Mike Brown for an extended contract, and they've been struggling. And then out of the blue, Mike Brown got fired. And so for those that follow the Kings, it kind of came out of left field. We knew something was going to change, but didn't think that it would be as abrupt and that he would be the one that was on the chopping block for sure. And so, it's been interesting because it ties back to the last one where I was just super pumped up that he like got into the referee space and other things like that. And so I've always enjoyed like his energy. I obviously don't know the inner dynamics of the team. I'm just a subscriber to YouTube TV that watches the games on a religious basis. But so outside of that, that's just been on my mind, just trying to think of like how does that decision get made, and are there like how that decision comes to fruition, because there's a lot of social media from other coaches on how the firing took place, like as a phone call as he was driving to the airport for the game that they were flying to. And so just some of those things that as you make hard decisions like that, whether it was the right or the wrong one, how the decision is done. So that's just been kind of on my mind of like someone who, has helped catalyze the Kings to kind of this next iteration. We're still not to where we want to be, but we're in a better place than we were, a while ago. So, so that's just been on my mind, and hopefully they can turn it around. And hopefully this maybe sparks a change in the culture of the team.
So, are both of our frivolous thoughts are stories of loss leading to a trough of sorrows from which we hope to emerge?
In the new year,
Five, here we come.
let's go. Let's go.
Oh, well, thanks so much for joining me as always, Cameron. The Zero Detraction is a fully independent production. It's just the two of us who do this thing. We don't have sponsors. We're not selling
Not
anything
yet.
to it. We
Not
just do
yet.
this right. Not yet. Yeah, if you're out there and you want to sponsor the show, hit us up. Got a lot of founders in our audience. But aside from that, we rely, basically entirely on word of mouth and organic growth to get more listeners. So I'd love it if you gave us a review or subscribe, follow whatever app, platform that you're using to listen to this right now. Do whatever the button is that's right next to the show. Click that for me and subscribe so you never miss an episode. And thanks Cameron for hopping on, and Happy New Year.
Yeah, Happy New Year. I'll see you in 2025. And crazy that the year flew by. A lot of fun building and looking forward to what the next year holds. And for all you founders out there, thanks for listening, and know there's resources out there, and definitely reach out, and we want to build with you. So let's help you get to where you're trying to go. Much the forest and the river and then the mountain will help you get to the mountaintop of fundraising and all of that good stuff. So keep listening, and let's do this work together.
Awesome. Well, that'll do it. Thanks again, everybody, for listening, and see you, Cameron. See you, everybody.
Cheers. Thanks.